Ed, when we left off yesterday, it would have been about 2 a.m. on the East Coast. What has been happening overnight?
Well, overnight, I don't know if you had any sleep. I certainly didn't. But while I was dozing and looking at the New York Times reviews, things changed dramatically. Uh, Arizona came into play and Nevada. And then very quickly, right after that, Wisconsin fell, then Michigan. And if you add, and Biden got to 254, I guess it is, or is that 254? Is that
253.
now? Huh?
253.
253. And Nevada and Arizona had to get a 17. I wasn't a math major, but I think that adds up to 270.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know what's happening in Pennsylvania, but the Biden team says it's going as scheduled, that they thought they'd have most of their people in the mail-in ballots. So Trump had a very large lead as I nodded off around 2 a.m. And that seems to be whittled down now to 3 or 4%, with hundreds of thousands of votes yet to come in from the Philadelphia area. So, of course, Trump asked to stop the voting. Now, maybe he doesn't read, but didn't the Supreme Court set 10 days to receive the ballots? It's a bit contradictory, isn't it, to have 10 days to receive the ballots, postmarked, of course, on the day of the election or before, and to call it on the evening of the election. Now, unless Trump has, of course, he's the Electoral College now, isn't he? So we're at a point now where my preference is Arizona and Nevada. And if Georgia comes over, I'll start reading polls again.
Yeah, look, Georgia was the big surprise. I mean, we still don't know if Georgia will go blue. It's 1% at the moment, still in favor of Trump. But that surge for Biden from early voting, that was certainly something.
It certainly was. And I think it really means that there's more in the tank. And it was supposed to be the other way around. It was supposed to be the surge for Trump. Trump's base all came out, and then there was nothing left in the tank. That's what it seems like.
Just want to touch on Pennsylvania. Just want to touch on Pennsylvania before we leave off that one. There's still a good margin for Trump, but that has shrunk in overnight. And I still think the mail-in count is going to be significant here. Personally, the margin that we're talking about is less than the margin was in Michigan before those mail-in votes and early votes started being counted in Michigan. And Michigan, of course, has now flipped blue.
Yeah, I have a map behind me with all the things that are blue at this time. I don't know if you can see it, but I still have North Carolina up there as blue, and Georgia is light blue. But Georgia, keep it on your mind.
Now, of course, we're going to mention Trump, true to form, has already claimed victory last night when some projections did show him ahead. Now he's claiming fraud and saying they'll take things to the Supreme Court. But his argument seems to be purely that they are still counting votes when I don't want them to. There is nothing else to this. His whole argument is, I don't want you to count more votes. And they're bringing a lawsuit to that effect in Michigan and talking about recounts in Wisconsin.
Well, look, first of all, voting is not a federal matter. It is a state matter. And so the only thing the federal Supreme Court can do is the state following its own rules and regulations? And that's what happened back in 2000. The court says, follow your own rules and regulations. The state then said, at this time, we're going to stop counting ballots, and whoever's won at that time, they win. It wasn't the Supreme Court that declared that. Wasn't their dictum. So in this case, he's just throwing out lawsuits. And this was anticipated. If you'll recall, a lot of pundits were saying lawsuits are going to start flying out all over the place, no matter how it goes, if he loses. And he'll do that until the time he departs the White House, if he ever departs. By the way, is the White House boarded up yet?
I think we've still got the non-scalable fence surrounding it.
Is that to keep his people in or to keep other people out?
Honestly, it's a good question. I feel like it's non-scalable on both sides.
Ah, excellent, excellent. So we'll have him locked in. I don't, you're too young, but President Truman lived across the street in the Blair House for almost his entire last 4 years because they were repairing the White House. So move into the Blair House. Not a bad spot. Right across the street. It's got all the accoutrements you need. The last thing they should do, the Biden people, is depend on force. If anyone uses force, it should be the Trump people. And if Georgia comes through, a lot of wind goes out of that sail. If Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona come through, then there's, oh gosh, they took it away from us. But if Georgia comes through, whoo! So let's hope and pray for that kind of return. This election was brutal in that the candidates spent more time calling one another's names than talking about any kind of policy. This is where I think it went wrong, mostly for Biden, because he fought back by calling names rather than announcing new policies. On COVID, he could have easily said, I'm putting together a task force, dividing the country into its 10 regions. The task force will come up with a plan for each of the regions. It'll be implemented nationally. National funds will go into it. And just like an army, we'll run it so that we win the war division by division. That's a plan. Simple, fair. Who can say it's stupid? Trump, of course. On the economy, the same thing. Start talking about doing what you did in Michigan before, opening up car plants to produce new and better cars, not throwing more money at it. So I think the opportunity to talk policy was diminished, but let's be fair here. These were the states that he was aiming at. Georgia, and the other one he was aiming at was Florida. And the Hispanic vote just wasn't big enough for him. There weren't enough Puerto Ricans, a lot of Venezuelans and Cubans who are hostile to anything that sounds like a government, because what they experienced as a government wasn't very good. Since Trump doesn't seem much like a government, they want to keep him there.
Obviously, once we've got some distance on this one, we'll be, I'm sure, analysing plenty about the results over the next few weeks. Looking at right now, though, in the Senate, Republicans projected to hang on to their lead. What's that going to mean for Biden presidency?
It's hard to say. Right now, it'll be what, 48 to 50 or 49 to 50? Yeah, I think 49 to 50 if you won Georgia. I think that's the way it'd work out, if you got one of the senators from Georgia. And Susan Collins can't be counted on by the other side. And I think she's going to play a lot of footsie with the Democrats. And she likes Joe. They go back a long way, etc. I think there are a few people now in the Senate with Trump gone who will be themselves, including Romney and others. And now that the major agenda, the court agenda has been completed, I don't know what else they'd want to do. Joe will go through with his look at the judiciary in the hopes there be some more Democrats in the next election 2 years from now. Usually you lose people at that time, but the Republicans will have an awful lot of people up. And fortunately, the Democrats have a lot of good material, some of which lost elections that they can put up. So anybody with a program is going to be better than what we had. And I think McConnell is going to have to start dealing with programs because his justice adventure is over.
And in the House, the Democrats seem to be clinging to their majority, but they've actually gone backwards, with Republicans having flipped some 7 seats. How in this election, of all elections, did they manage to go backwards?
Well, a couple of things. Some of those seats were lost because the incumbents were sitting on their assets. And they were in districts where very little had changed in a long time. They used the Ocasio-Cortez thing. Nothing's happened in Baltimore, so let me in to make it happen. So I think that is a loss. It's a tough loss. They'll keep their majority. It's a clear majority. I thought they'd pick up, and so do they, 5 or 6 seats. So what are they going to have, 218? And that's just right on the governing model.
Yeah, that's right on the nose.
Yeah, but the Republicans will have about 190. So there's a nice gap there.
Moving forward, we assume the projections for Biden are correct, and we assume that they can't stop the count just because I feel like it. But the Supreme Court is not yet involved. What happens when Trump refuses to concede? I know we've spoken about this, but looking at the situation now.
Well, 2 things can happen, and this is where McConnell comes in, because he said over and over again, we will not tamper with the structure of our democracy for you, Mr. President. And if the Republican Senate and the House come together and say, if you don't leave, we will throw you out of office. And they have 2 ways to do that, as you know, incapacity and impeachment. I think the threat would be there, and I think they would do it if they had to. So they're lining up all these potential strategies. One of them I mentioned earlier, and that is to swear the new president in and let Trump wander around the White House, take out all the guards, turn off the water, etc. And as long as he didn't set fire to the building, let him stay there, because the police are coming at some time to get him for all of his misdeeds. We'll have to do a special show on that when that happens.
And just internationally, what kind of reaction have we actually seen from other nations in regards to this one? I mean, here in Australia, all eyes were pretty much fixed on the US election, I'd have to say. So what kind of reaction are we seeing?
Well, we've heard from some people, like the vice parliamentarian, whatever you call him, the second person in command in Ireland, saying, in democracies, you let everyone vote. Similar sentiments were echoed from the British, from all over the world, because they're aiming at Trump. it's very important for these countries to have an American democracy work. Fighting among one another in some civilized ways, okay. But if the American democracy starts to show that it's falling apart, the onslaught around the world is pretty horrific. So let's keep everything crossed. The number of friends the United States still has, the US is the jilted girlfriend that everybody wants back.
Just before we do move off that one, I think when we talk about, we'll talk about this more in the coming weeks, assuming everything does go relatively smoothly. But this election, regardless of whether Biden is successful or not at this point, it was not a rejection of Trump. I mean, it didn't show a rejection of Trumpism in the Republican Party. Republicans have become the Trump Party, and voters have not rejected them for it. Trumpism, which I think is just sort of fascism in a funny wig, is it going to continue to be a powerful force in American politics for time to come?
Well, Trump TV is already launched,
so
I anticipate that will be the case. That Trump will try to become an important figure, public figure. There's going to be a split in the party. The Lincoln Republicans will probably start finding candidates to run as Republicans, and there'll be Trump Republicans or Trump people. I don't know how they run without him on the campaign with them, because he is the electricity in those circuses. He's the big elephant, and if you don't have the elephant, a tame little pony won't do. And he can't run everywhere. But I think, and we've seen that here with Clyde Palmer, he's going to become one of those kinds of people. Hanson, kind of a third party leader. Now, his own personal problems may interfere with that. And again, I think they'll let the courts and others handle that. Trump is sounding like he wants to find a way of saying that somebody did this to him, and then going out on the road as his rallying cry for his television programs and the rest. And that saves face for him. He can claim he won for forever.
Well, I think it's a nice way of putting it, Ed. Look, more to come on this one, but thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, mate.